Well, you went through a lot just to get here this Sunday, and I'm going to start off asking you a rather hard question. Have you ever been accused of being a poor listener? We've got a lot of guys here, so I'm thinking, yeah, probably, yeah. Or maybe we should call it selective listening. We hear what we want to hear. Most of us have been guilty of this from time to time. Or maybe we're just easily distracted. Publisher Tom Rainer collected stories from other ministers about some of the distractions that have taken place in worship and kind of gathered them together. You can imagine, an older historic church like this, and the preacher's up at the pulpit and a bat swooping through the congregation. That might get you off track. Or, a fidgety kid up in the front row, just kicking his feet back and forth because they don't touch the ground, and a shoe accidentally comes off. Lands right up here by the preacher. The preacher kept his cool and kept on going. But the one that really stood out was about the overzealous church custodian. He came in and he wanted the wood pews to just sparkle. And he polished them up so good that when all the congregation came and tried to sit and stay in one place, they couldn't because they kept sliding around. Oh, but the preacher, he kept on preaching, even though some of the people even slipped off and fell on the floor. Such distractions can get a speaker off track, or certainly get us listeners thinking about all kinds of other stuff other than the sermon. But these are the kinds of reasons that communications break down. Maybe we have trouble listening to others because we're tired or stressed out. Maybe we, I hate to say it, just don't care enough to others, or we don't pay close attention to them. We've all been guilty of being a bad listener at one time or another. And maybe that's why Jesus spoke in parables, because he's trying to get our attention. He's trying to get something that's going to get us involved in his message. He knew we are easily distracted. And he knew we have our own agendas. And he knew that sometimes we even let our own egos get in the way and we're not really listening to the voice of God. Maxie Dunham, for, decades, worked for the upper room. And then he was a professor at Asbury Theological Seminary. Now he's emeritus professor. But boy, could he write stories. He likes to tell the story about the University of Tennessee football coach. Here we go, 2 football illustrations in a row, and Carl's going to miss one. So here we go. University of Tennessee, football coach goes into Knoxville, into the tailor shop. He'd acquired a bolt of some really nice looking fabric, and so he asked the tailor, "Can you make me a suit with this?" And so the tailor measures him all out, and he gets his paper out, and he calculates, and he says, "Coach, I'm sorry. There just isn't enough fabric on this bolt to make you a suit." And kind of disgusted, the coach walks out and puts the bolts of fabric in the trunk of his car, and he forgets about it for a few weeks. Well, he was on his way for a family vacation, and he happened to be driving through Tuscaloosa, Alabama. So if you know the University of Tennessee and the Crimson Tide, boy, they don't like each other. They're arch enemies, but as he's driving down the street of Tuscaloosa, he sees a tailor shop and he remembers that bolt of fabric that he has back in his car, and he says, well, what the heck? So he takes it into the tailor shop and he says, well, I've got this nice fabric. Is there something you can do with this? So the tailor measures him, and he gets his paper out and he starts calculating. And he says, well, Coach, I got good news for you. I can make you a suit, an extra pair of pants, and if you want me to really cut things close, I could probably even get a vest out of it. Well, the coach says, well, my tailor at Knoxville said that there wasn't enough material to make a suit. Well, the tailor said, well, you know, down here in Tuscaloosa, we don't think you're such a big man as they do in Knoxville. Oh. You know, we all like to think we're a big man or a big woman in some arena. And it just doesn't feel so good when we get derailed or deflated. But imagine how the listeners in today's Bible passage felt. The parable would have shocked them. It may have just blown their minds. Let's hope that, you know, their egos weren't so big that they just said, this guy is way out there. We're leaving. Doesn't have anything to say to us. But you know, I don't think it just happened back then. Maybe there's times that our big egos prevent us from hearing and understanding what God might want to say to us today. Well, you know, the Bible passage, you know, it starts out with the words, to some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else with contempt, Jesus told this parable. You know, every parable Jesus told is an opportunity to understand God better, an opportunity to conform our lives to the image of God, to understand what it means to live in God's kingdom, an opportunity to turn away from sin and get a fresh start. And so, what did Jesus want to teach his hearers with this story? Well, you know, we're not on Team Pharisee, right? So we just think, oh, look at this smug, self-righteous guy. He is so ripe to be taken down a few pegs. We're not like that, right? Whoops. Well, you know, Jesus was trying to teach us. He's trying to teach his hearers that when we compare ourselves with others, when we kind of try to rank things, you know, we have a way of not engaging and not having anything to offer to God. We're in no position to hear God speaking to us when we're busy telling God, hey, we're doing so great, look at what I'm doing here and here and here and here. Aren't I hot stuff? What does the tax collector in this parable do? I think he probably came in after greeting time because he didn't want to have to hear what everybody might have to say when he showed up in the synagogue. And if there was a pew that was so far back in the corner in the shadows that somebody might not see him, that's the spot where he sat. And then he didn't even look up. He couldn't look up. And he just prayed. He just looked down, beat his breast in sorrow, and just simply said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. That was it. God, have mercy on me, a sinner. This tax collector compared himself to a holy, holy God. And he knew he didn't, nothing to offer. I think the tax collector could identify with that really remorseful time in King David's life. At a time when we see some of these words that were put into Psalm 51. It said, my sacrifice, O God, is a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. You, God, will not despise. That's getting real. Getting down to what really matters. It was a few years ago when a famous physicist was giving a lecture at Princeton. And in the lecture hall, there was a group of pastors, and they listened attentively to the lecture, and then he got to question and answer time at the end, and one of the pastors stood up and said, what is it that ministers can learn from scientists? And without hesitation, the physicist simply said, humility. And you can imagine the pastor's like, what? How about that? That was a surprising answer. That's not what he was thinking. A questioner said, well, I thought all you scientists were rather arrogant because you think you have all the answers. And the physicist said, no, not at all. You may meet one or two here or there, but the great scientists are all very humble people because they stand every morning before the mystery of all that we don't know. And if anybody should be humble, it would be the minister who every morning stands before the mystery of the Creator and Sustainer and Redeemer of the world. In my background in science, I find that to be very true. Some of our greatest, most brilliant scientists are so humble. And if we're going to learn something, we're going to have to remember that we cannot know who God is if we're still filled with pride and self-righteousness. For if anyone should be humble, it would be those of us who every morning stand before the mystery of the Creator, Sustainer, and Redeemer of the universe. Puts us in our place. But it makes things more real, more authentic. Philip Yancey wrote a lot of books, and he got invited to speak a lot. And he was invited to speak at a conference that was in ministry to women who were in prostitution, or trying to get out of a life of prostitution. And at the end of the talk, Yancey asked the women, he said, do you know Jesus referred to your profession? He said, let me read you what it says. It says, I tell you the truth, the tax collectors and the prostitutes are entering the kingdom of God ahead of you. And he went on to say he was talking to the religious authorities of his day. And what do you think? What do you think Jesus meant? Why did he single out prostitutes? Boy, can you imagine just how quiet a whole big lecture hall of women could get for a few minutes? Until one young woman with a Eastern European accent spoke up in her broken English. And she said, everyone, she has someone to look down on, not us. We are the low. Our families, they feel shame for us. No mother nowhere looks at her little girl and says, oh, honey, when you grow up, I want you to be a good prostitute. Oh, that doesn't happen. Believe me, we know how people feel about us. People call us names, and sometimes when you're at the low, you cry out for help. So when Jesus comes, we respond. Maybe Jesus meant that. Maybe your English isn't so good, but I think she makes a point, don't you? Sometimes when you are at the low, you cry out for help. So when Jesus comes, we respond. The tax collector was at the low, and he cried out to God for help. Oh, I like C.S. Lewis. Boy, he's written a lot of great stuff. And some of his fantasy stories are even more profound than his nonfiction. So the story, The Great Divorce, a busload of people from hell are driven up to the gates of heaven. And they're offered admission. Only one guy got out of the bus. Everybody else was like, oh, no. And oh boy, the people in heaven, they were so radiant and so substantial that they make the visitors from hell look like mere shadows. And so this one pale ghost from hell wanders through the gates and into heaven. And he wanders around for a bit, and he runs into somebody he knew. And he's upset. He's upset when he meets the citizen of heaven, because in the previous lives, this heavenly citizen had worked for him. But, and he hadn't really been such a great guy. And on top of that, at some point in his life, he committed murder. So what was he doing there? He's thinking, how dare he live in heaven now? He hadn't earned that right. The citizen from hell complains, look at me now. I got straight all my life. I don't say I was a religious man. I don't say I didn't have faults. Far from it. But I'd done my best all my life, see? That's the sort of chap I was. I never asked for anything that wasn't mine by rights. If I wanted a drink, I paid for it. And if I was paid wages, I'd done my job, see? I'm not asking for anything but my rights. I'm not asking for anybody's bleeding charity. Well, after he finishes his rant, the citizen from heaven just looks him in the eyes and he says, then do at once ask for the bleeding charity. The tax collector asked for the bleeding charity, and God gave it to him. Jesus finishes his parable with the words, I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all those who humble themselves will be exalted. What does that mean? He went home justified. It means his sins were forgiven. Now, I think the Pharisee was just too busy telling about how good he was, he forgot he had some. So it was the tax collector who got exactly what he asked for. Mercy. From a holy, holy God who knows that we can never do enough. We can never do enough to be holy, to earn a place in God's presence, to say that we deserve God's mercy. So God, you know what God did? He sent his perfect, sinless Son, Jesus, to take away the penalty of our sins and to make us holy in God's eyes. And so that brings us to the take-home point of the parable. If you don't know grace, you don't know God. Because grace, the unearned gift of God's love and salvation through Jesus the Christ, was God's plan from the very beginning. God's grace, oh man, it's such an outrageous grace. It should blow our minds. So far away from anything that we could earn or deserve. And still, God piles it on. Just a moment of putting things into perspective. Paul taught about those who were all talk and no action, those who left him hanging in his time of trial. And the truth is that while there are millions of Christians who don't want to be associated with the Christians of questionable views, politics, practices, those who just label themselves as Christian but don't do the work of being a Christian. Those same millions out there, nonetheless, are very busy. Very busy Christianing. They're not saying, hey, look at me, I'm on Team Jesus. I'm a Christian. No, they're just day by day serving God faithfully in our troubled world. They're building hospitals and schools, developing programs to give a hand up to the poor and those who are in need. They're helping at their local church. They're working with refugees, helping them to find housing and learn to speak English. They're counseling low-functioning adults. They're tutoring teens who need some help with their academics. They're delivering meals to the elderly. They're leading Bible studies and visiting nursing homes. They aren't going to let their work be derailed by those, in their opinion, are silly, misguided, immature Christians blabbering nonsense in a public arena. For being a Christian isn't a title. It's not being a fan, but it's trusting and learning to trust completely and wholly in God's grace. And the sort of actions listed above, they're not saying, hey God, I did this and this and this, so let me in. No. They're just the sort of things that just naturally happen when you get to know God. You get to know God's grace. When you turn Christian from a noun into a verb. When you just are spending the rest of your life trying to figure out, well, how do I live when I'm filled with this outrageous grace?